Good morning. Hope you all are ready and have had time to read a little bit in your lesson for this week. Got a couple people here watching live, so hopefully we'll have some conversation and input on this. This week we're going to study in 1 Samuel chapter 26, verse 5 through 12, and then 21 through 25. But last time when we left, we were in 1 Samuel chapter 20, so we're skipping ahead to 26, but a lot has happened in between that time that I think would be a good idea if we kind of backtrack and see what's happened. We know last week when we studied that Saul had tried to kill David, and that David and Jonathan had made a plan to test Saul to see if he was angry and see if his apologies were real or if he had just pretended like he was sorry for what he had done. So that's where we leave off on our last lesson. And we see after the last lesson when David wasn't at the meal and King Saul asked where he was, he got very angry because he wasn't there, and that was going to be the sign. They had told him that David had gone back to be with his family to a celebration, and David and Jonathan both agreed that if Saul was okay with that and he took that and was good with that he wasn't angry and he no longer had this hatred for David. But we find that Saul does get really mad, and he gets so mad, in fact, that he even throws a spear at his own son because he has figured that, now he sees that, or he's, in his mind, he thinks Jonathan's on David's side instead of his. He's let this, if we said this, anger fester up in him, and he never checked it at any point. And he's listened to people, and he's just let it grow and grow until it's like a cancer in his body at this time. In chapter 21, we see that David, it says he goes to Nob, to Ahimelech, I may not say this properly, the priest at Nob, when he's running away from Saul. And he asked the priest for bread, and it was bread that had been in the temple that was the temple bread that normally they didn't eat. But David told him that he was there and that he was waiting on his men to come behind him. He didn't tell the complete truth on that. He was desperate and he was trying to get away from Saul, and he was doing, I guess, what he thought he had to do to survive at the time. And while he's there, and he left and he didn't have weapons either, and the only weapon that was available there that the priest had to give him was the sword of Goliath that David had captured at the battle. So he took that sword and left with him. And then it says David went to Gath after that, and Gath was with the Philistines. I wanted to read a little bit to you. When Saul went to Achish, king of Gath, and the servants asked Achish, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't this the one they sing about in their dances? Saul had slain thousands, and David the 10,000s." So David was kind of trying to just secretly hide himself and get away and go unnoticed. But because of what he's done, that's kind of hard to do. He's a man that's, his name has risen, and sometimes it seems above Saul's. And it says, I'm reading out of chapter 21, verse 12. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. So he pretended to be insane in their presence. And while he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look at this man. He is insane. What brings him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fella here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house?" So, David does what he has to do to survive, and a lot of us, I guess, are better at that than others, but, he saw that they realized who he was and that he wasn't going to be welcome there with them, so he thought if he acted like a crazy man that they would just kind of put him aside or not doing it. It looks like he did a good job, that he was licking the doors and stuff and drooling, and so David was playing the part very well, and it worked apparently, because they're like, you know, why is this crazy man come up in front of me? So at that point he left Gath, and he said he escaped to the cave at Adullam, and says in chapter 22, all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. So this man who has been anointed as the next king of Israel is on the run at this point. He has, you know, he's had to do whatever he has to keep alive. He's come to hide, and it seems like that the people that gathered around him, that he's got kind of a rag-bag team of ruffians that either were in distress or did, so that they all had problems. It was a group of, that some way or the other, that they all had issues. And he became the leader of these men. Saul is looking hard for David at this point. He even comes back to Nob, where David had originally gone, and he killed the priest there. And he, the only one, the son of Ahimelech, was able to get away to come back and tell David what's going on. So, you know, this had to weigh on David's mind, I would think, because he had gone to these priests, and they had given him help and helped him out. And for this, it took their life for what they had done for him. So, you know, that has to weigh on David. And it says Saul continues to pursue David. After David had been, in verse 24, Saul was after him. It says, verse 3, he came to the sheep pens along the way. A cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself. So Saul is still searching for David. David and his band are in that cave. And David is able to come upon Saul close enough, because Saul went into the cave to use the restroom. And I know he had his robes, and I don't know whether if he had a grand robes, if he had to take it off or exactly what. But David was able to get close enough to him to cut off a piece of that robe, so David could have easily killed him. He didn't even know he was there. But David, verse 5, it says, afterward David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lift my hand against him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these marks, David rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went his way. So, you know, David standing in the way of these men, because by being after David, and these men were with him, you know, they were in as much danger now. And David wouldn't allow him to do anything against Saul when they had him there. And verse 25, we see that as David's men have been traveling around, that there was a man named Nabal that was a very rich man. He had lots of animals and sheep, and David's men had been camping around them, and they had been kind of on guard for anybody that might come in that camp and bother them. Not that Nabal had asked them or expected them to, but just by virtue of being there, they had been some protection for them. And David sent his men to go ask if he had any meat or any food that he could offer to them, and, you know, and saying that we've been there and you noticed nothing bad, or you've not been missing any of your animals or livestock or possessions while we're there, that, you know, we have second-handedly afforded some protection. But Nabal, you know, he was a pretty evil man. He's not, no, I won't give you anything. Why are you here asking me this? And he really went against David. And luckily, Nabal's wife, Abigail, had a little more, I don't know if sense is the good word, or a little more idea of what was going on, because by this point, David was really mad at what was going on, and his intent was to go kill Nabal and all the males that had anything to do with that. So Abigail, his wife, loaded down donkeys full of food and provisions for the men, and they asked that she went to David and she asked for forgiveness for how her husband acted. And David did forgive her, and he told her, you know, you've saved the lives of many because of what you did, because that you came and did an act of kindness toward us. And then it says in verse 13, then in the morning so Nabal has his big celebration because they've done the sheep shearing. They have made it through the season and done well, and you know, which he had plenty that he could have afforded to give David. So they had a big celebration amongst themselves. And it says, then in the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. So, you know, Nabal paid for these actions with his life. Abigail saved a lot of other lives, but she wasn't able to save Nabal in the evil of his heart. And when David heard that, he sent and asked for Abigail to become his wife. So she became one of David's wives after that. It says in verse 41, she bowed down with her face to the ground and said, here is your maidservant, ready to serve you and wash the feet of my master's servants. Okay, so this gets us up to chapter 26 where we've been. So we see in the meantime David has done a lot of running. He doesn't have a place to call home right now. I mean, he's not able. He's even had to pick up his parents and get them out of the country because Saul is after him. So David's life hasn't been easy up to this point. He's, as we read in the last two lessons, he is the next anointed king of Israel, but he's having some really hard times in the meantime. The golden text for this lesson is, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. And our lesson aim for today is, we should love our enemies and do good to them. We should wait patiently for God's purposes to be worked out. So we see that David, he has waited, and sometimes for God's purpose, sometimes he's kind of gotten ahead of it. We're going to see through this. Sometimes, you know, you think, we were talking this morning about enjoying to read the Old Testament, and you might wonder, well, what does the Old Testament have to do with life now? It was, you know, so far in the things that happened, and what is it with King David? The biggest thing that, you know, I guess I take from it is that we see David is human. And I thought about this a lot this weekend. Most everybody, whether you're in church or not, has heard about David and Goliath. I mean, that's just something that's pretty common knowledge for everybody. And we see, you know, David at the top of the mountain, that, you know, he was able to walk in as a little shepherd boy. He was able to kill Goliath and get the Israelites out of a big battle, spare them a lot of death. He was able to go after that. When Saul sent him out trying to get him killed and send him in battles, he was able to win those battles. So we see David on the mountaintop, and then what we're reading now, we see David in the valley. And we hope, you know, the purpose and what we should take from this is, God's with us in the mountaintop, and he's with us in the valley. And sometimes we have to wade through the valley. Nobody likes to be there. We love the mountaintop, you know, slaying Goliath and all our troubles and walking right through them with a sword. That's the good times. But when we're in the bad times, we see that God is with us. but that sometimes you got to have a little patience and you got to wait, because he knows the end result of it. We don't. We want to make it what we want to be, but sometimes not knowing the big picture, we can make a big mess out of things that we think might be to our advantage when it's really not for us. So let's start with in chapter 26, verse 5. It says, "And David arose and came to the place where Saul had pitched. And David beheld the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, the captain of his host, and Saul lay in the trench, and the people pitched round about him." So David has come upon, Saul is really close to him. I wouldn't say David's come upon Saul. Saul has come upon David. and he's camped really close to him. And they're all sleeping, and it says the captain of the host is right behind. So, Saul's really protected by his men around him. Saul has, as we've seen throughout David's struggles, we'll see, Saul has people that are still loyal to him all over the territory. So wherever David's running, somebody's seeing him at some point running back and telling Saul. So wherever David is, Saul hasn't been too far behind him. So it's been a terrible existence for David. It says, "Hard as the 7 years of exile were for David to bear, yet they were most fruitful years to him as his apprenticeship for the kingdom." So as bad as this looks and as hard as it is for David, he's learning to be a king. This is training him, and as it says, it was like sharpening him. And in spite of the few lapses from faith and perfect truth, he grew in character and manhood. He became strong in faith and virtue, large-hearted, wise, noble, and consecrated to God. So through all this, David is learning. They say some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth and everything comes to them. They get money easy. Everything seems to be easy. And sometimes, if you know these people, they're pretty cruel to deal with. They don't understand what it is to be poor.
They don't know the hard times.
Right. That they know the good times, and that's all.
Everything given to them, so they don't want to. They really haven't earned it.
Right. And they don't have any kind of empathy for people that have had hard times, and because they haven't been there. They didn't. I was talking to somebody the other day about people being in service for the country and having any loyalty to our country. Once you've been in service for the country, you've had that. You put your life in danger, and you've been out there and done that. And people just don't realize that haven't done things. It's hard to know like this. So David's being trained to be a large-hearted king. I mean, you think that a king has power over life and death over people, and you hope that he is a large-hearted king that's not going to throw you in a lion's den or something from that. So that is the point that that's what's happening in David's life, whether he sees it or not right now, which I assume it's pretty hard to see in the condition. Verse 6 says, "Then answered David and said to Ahimelech the Hittite and Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother to Joab, saying, Who will go down with me to Saul to the camp? And Abishai said, I'll go down with you." So it says that Abishai was the son of David's sister, so it's David's nephew, and he's volunteering to go down with him. And this is, Saul's got several thousand men down there waiting, and David is going to go down there, and he asked for he wasn't going to make anybody. He asked for a volunteer to do it. So he's going to go in the midst, and if you think of it, Saul's going to be in the center because he's going to be the most protected one in the camp. So you're going to have to, whatever way you decide to go in that camp, you're going to go through a lot of armed men to get to Saul. verse 7 says, So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. But Abner and the people lay round about him. So they crept in and made it all the way up to where Saul was laying. You know, you would think there was sentinels or guards watching if somebody came in. Verse 8 it says, Then Abishai said to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thy hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear, even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. So Abishai, they got in there, and he's really brave, and Saul's own spear is stuck in the ground, and Abishai says, let me kill him right now. I will, you know, it'll be so quick and violent that nobody will ever hear that it happened. You know, he won't have time to yell and say anything to that. And, you know, if you think back about it, I'll read some things here in the lesson. It says, what reasons were there for killing Saul? Saul had tried to kill David at least 3 times. Saul had given David his daughter as a wife. Then he had taken her back away from him. Saul had cast his javelin at David's friend Jonathan. So he's gone after him. He's gone after his wife. He's gone after his friends. Saul had hunted David like a wild beast. Saul had forced the removal of David's aged father and mother from their home. So everything close to David, Saul has tried to destroy. Anything.
Whatever was in his way between Saul and David, Saul took out.
Yes, Saul. There was nothing, stopping him. Says Saul was governing the kingdom poorly. Saul had murdered the high priest and scores of other innocent persons. So Saul was becoming more ruthless during this time. It mentioned part of the reading was sometimes when we had talked about this before, this jealousy and this evil spirit that was over Saul, if you kind of if the Lord's speaking to you to change into your feelings, or other people are coming to you and saying, hey, David, look, as Jonathan did, David hasn't done anything bad to you, why are you doing this? That each time you deny that your heart's a little bit harder, and that the next time to deny it, it's easier till you're so far away from that person that there's really not a lot of turning around if you don't accept the Lord and to do that. Verse 9 says, And David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? So, David was also anointed of the Lord, but he didn't feel that it was his place to kill this man to get into his position. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the Lord's purpose in anointing him. It said in verse 10 says, David said furthermore, As the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. Okay, so he says, As the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him. So he's putting it in the Lord's hand. He's not taking this in his hand, as a lot of times we do things when we don't want to wait for the Lord to do things. We hurry it along and do. I remember something that Brother Bowen would tell us at certain lessons, that he knew a woman that son had some problems, and she prayed for him. And he said she had asked the Lord, Lord, I have served you, and you've promised that you would take care of me and protect me, and I'm asking you for my son's sake to, I forget the particular situation, but to take care of him and to let him live or get him through this. And, and he said later that the Lord did, that this boy did improve from whatever this was. but later that this boy did a pretty horrific crime that he did, but that, you know, he felt like this woman had pushed the Lord, you do what I want you to do, and this is the way I want it done. But it turned out to be a terrible catastrophe for her son in the long run, that she didn't listen and let the Lord, in His time and in His way, change the situation, that she, you know, asked. And sometimes with our kids, won't we do that? If they ask for something and we know it's not right, that sometimes for a learning experience, you give them what they want, and, you know, and it doesn't always turn out to be what they want.
And one thing that's hard for people to understand too, I mean, you got to understand that you need to work with the Lord's time, don't work with your time, kind of deal.
Yes.
You need to let everything take place on the Lord's time. Don't let it take place on your time, because your time ain't going to be the right time.
Right.
I mean, the Lord's time will be the right time. I mean, it might be one day, it might be 3 months, it might be a couple of years.
But yes.
But I mean, I know human nature, we want it just like that now.
Microwave fast.
Exactly, microwave fast. And
Yeah.
you can't even get it that fast.
Yeah.
20 more seconds, 20 more seconds on the microwave.
Or in a drive-through window. What's
Yeah.
taking them so long? So we do, you know, we need to learn, and that's part of growth as a Christian, is to have the patience
Exactly.
to wait on the Lord and to do these things. In verse 11 it says, the Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed, but I pray thee, take thou the spear that is in his bolster and the cruse of water, and let us go. So he's taken the things, it says the emblems of Saul's royal power, he's removing from Saul right there. Saul is sleeping through it. And it says, he that ruleth his own spirit is greater than he that taketh a city. And that is true. You know, controlling yourself and your own impulses is the hardest thing you'll do. You know, ruling a city or whatever, you can kind of see and do that and look over it, but to have this man who's trying to kill you right at your mercy then and not kill him takes a lot of spirit on your behalf.
You was talking about in the Lord's time. And I can remember Charles and I, lots of time we talk about, we prayed for our son for 20-some years. And he got saved about 2 months before he died. So, you know, it's not easy to wait. You want it done now, but God works it out.
But to persevere through,
Yeah.
and you know, and the end result is no matter how long that you did it and you did do it, your son was saved because of it. I mean, and that's the biggest part of it is if you're willing, if you want something that bad, to wait for. Verse 12, it's, so David took the spear and the cruse of water from Saul's bolster, and they gat him away, and no man saw it, nor knew it, nor awakened, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. So the Lord's here with David again. He helped him get into that camp, because hopefully, you know, in battle, there's going to be somebody that watches, or somebody that's in charge of the night sentry or whatever. But at this particular time, because it was the Lord's will to do that, they were able to walk right through all these people, do this. And, you know, sometimes you wonder, at the time, David didn't know that they weren't going to wake, that the Lord was going to keep them asleep. You know, was this more of a test for David's character? He could have killed him.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he had the opportunity. These people were laying there waiting for him, but David was faithful even through that. And you know, sometimes in life we do have tests. We find a bunch of money.
Do you stick it in your pocket, or do you turn it in?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, and that's a test of our character to them, is, you know, we can have this money and not say a word to it, but usually there's that conscience thing, even though you do that this thing that you've done, if David had killed him, what kind of king would he have been? What would this have made from his kingdom, from his start, his relationship with the Lord? What would it have been at that point?
Yep.
So, David really made a decision that could have been one that affected the whole rest of his life. So, and I think it's the same with us. Some decisions
And it's probably hard. I mean, somebody running after you wanting to kill you, and you got them in your sights right there. You could just end it all. No more running, no more, fleeing, nothing like that. But you're doing the obedience to the Lord, of not killing this guy and going with like your golden text where it says, love your enemy, do good to them which hate you. I mean,
and he could have, like you say, ended Saul. The people were singing his praises at the time. Saul's killed thousands, and he could have thought.
Yeah, the Lord didn't try him just once. He tried it. He had many times to take Saul out.
Yeah. So David is continuing his faithfulness even through a struggle.
And it was saying like in the time I was seeing right here, this lasted for 7 years. So,
that's a long time to run. Yeah. When you know you're in line to be king of the country, especially. I mean, that's the end of this, and I could hurry this along and do it, but David hasn't been willing to bend on his principles, his service.
Sometimes, somebody had 7 years of trouble, they give up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they give up in the first year.
Yeah. And that's, Christians, when you first become a Christian, darts are thrown at you. Sometimes it seems like everything that can come against you comes against you. To end that early, you have to persevere. You have to have help and good counsel to make it through these things that you're doing. So it skips in chapter 26. It skips ahead to verse 21, but in the meantime, the verses that we've skipped, David wakes them up in between that we don't see in the lessons, and he says, look what I've got. I've been in your camp. I've had the opportunity to kill Saul, and he really gets on Saul's guard. That that you're not fit to guard him, that you've left the king open, and I could have killed him, but I didn't do it. So he lets them know that I've been there and I could have done it, but I didn't do it. So starting back in verse 21, once we came, then said Saul, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly. Have we heard this before? Saul throws a spear at him, and then he's so sorry. I'm sorry. I won't do this again. Come back.
Almost sounds like reverse psychology kind of deal.
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes, maybe for just that long, Saul's sorry. I mean, because he has to value his life, or he does value his life, obviously. But, he keeps doing this, so I'm really sorry, come back, I won't do this again. But, he's become really hardened, a little more hardened. It says, and David answered and said, behold the king's spear, let one of the young men come over and fetch it. So he's offering, here's your spear back, send somebody over here to get it. The Lord rendered to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered thee into my hand today, but I would not stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. So he's saying, that he's telling them the Lord made me able to get in and do these things. But even with that, I wasn't willing to touch you as the Lord's anointed. So David, realizes that God helped him there. Sometimes I think we don't realize that, or sometimes we forget it, or we think maybe we've done something to do that the Lord does a whole lot more for us than we ever even give him credit for doing for us. In verse 24 it says, "And behold, as thy life was much set by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be as much set by the eyes of the Lord, and let me deliver me out of all, and let him deliver me out of all tribulations." And it says in the lessons that this was David's last words to Saul. This was kind of their last face-to-face speaking meeting. And it says, "Then Saul said to David, Blessed be thou, my son David. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt still prevail." So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. It says in Saul's last words to David, he blessed him and foretold his ultimate triumph. Here are the two whom Saul had anointed, as Samuel had anointed as kings, the king who has forfeited his crown, and the king of the golden future, parted forever. So, I wanted to read to you something before as we close the class out today. And like I had said, part of what I take away from all the lessons of David and a lot in the Old Testament were that even though they were capable of doing things bigger than life because of the Lord's help, that they were people just like us. We can get them built up, and we can see David as the hero that walked out single-handedly and killed this giant in front of the whole army when he wasn't a trained army man. But David was human. He had feelings. He had fear. He had all the things that we have. Nothing's different. I wanted to read to you Psalms 13, and this was written by David. It says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me." So we see from that David has his very, very low times, and I'm sure real often in those years. But it says, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me." So it's we said many times, the Lord doesn't promise us all good times and easy times once you're a follower of him, but he does promise he will be with us always. And that's what, as we see, as we read these Old Testament books, the Lord is with them always. It's not always in the day, the minute that they see it, but he's always there. And, I'm sure they feel his spirit as we do, that he's with us. Things don't happen in our time. But we see here that David is human, that he cries out to the Lord. And if you have time, read Psalms. David wrote a lot of these, and they were sang. But you just really, by reading them, you see David's true feelings, and you see our feelings written out. So, anything you all want to add?
Oh, one thing you got to think too. To go with what you said is, you got to realize the Lord will go before you, and then you will follow him. Like when Saul went into, when David went into Saul's camp, the Lord went before him, put those men to sleep, deep sleep, before Saul went in there and got the spirit.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So you can think that the Lord goes before you instead of just being with you.
And even though you don't realize what he's done when he's done that, so that is a good point. All right. Thank you all, and we'll see you for services at 11 and then next Sunday. Thanks.